Hello, welcome to the Museum of Australian Democracy at Old Parliament House. Today we're in the space we call the bunker. So this is the behind the scenes workrooms where we do our heritage collection management and conservation work. And we just have in front of us here the latest piece that we're accepting into the collection. And I'm here with one of the main curators of the project, Tal Fitzpatrick. Hello, Tal.
Hello, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Beautiful piece here. It's a patchwork quilt. Now, patchworking has a long tradition across the centuries and across cultures, and probably everyone at home's got a patchwork quilt that's been given to them, or they've bought, or they've made themselves. Functional, beautiful, decorative, but this one is that and more. So Tal, tell us about this one.
Yeah, so technically this is a Wagga quilt, which is a Australian specific style of quilting that came about during the Depression, where people, just for utility's sake, when resources were in short supply, started to make quilts out of old clothes, particularly woolen suits, and they often used good quality flour bags as either the batting or the backing of the quilts, which is where the name Wagga comes from.
Yeah, and the fabric used in this one, it looks like ties.
Yeah, so the
Beautiful
quilt's
quality,
made out of suit swatches that were from a tailor who didn't use that kind of suit swatch book anymore, and all of the borders are made out of cut up ties.
Okay, suits and ties, but it's not just about a fabric quilty. What else is behind it?
Yeah, so the idea behind this project was, the project kind of asks two questions. It asks the question of people, if you had one chance to say something to the Prime Minister, to give him a message, what would your message be? And the other question that it kind of asks as an artwork is, how hard is it to get your message across to someone like the Prime Minister, who's supposed to be representing all of us?
Exactly, and of course there in the centre is that representation of Prime Minister at the time, Malcolm Turnbull. And on each of the squares is an embroidered message. So for example, PM please put people before the economy. And each of these has a different message. Where did all the messages come from, Tal?
Yeah, so when I kind of thought up this project, I, using social media, asked people the question, what would your message be? And over the space of 3 weeks, I collected responses from people using Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. So these are all the messages I collected. There's 121 messages from different people of different ages from all over the country. And the promise I made to them was that I would stitch these onto the quilt, and that I would then give this quilt as a gift to the Prime Minister.
And has the Prime Minister seen the quilt?
Yes. So for the first kind of 6 months after I finished the quilt, I was trying really hard to get it to him in person. And I got really close. I got 1-2 degrees of separation from him. I met someone who knew his neighbour. We tried to get a letter to his wife, but I didn't quite get there, and it was 2 days until the election, and I was like, oh dear, I have to get it to him before this election. So I drove up from Melbourne to Sydney, and I handed it in to his office in Wentworth, to the nice ladies behind the counter, and they said that they'd make sure that he sees it. And 2 days after the election was called, which was actually about 2 weeks, I got a phone call saying that he'd seen the quilt, he was happy to accept it, and that he appreciated the work that went into it. So yeah, but then as it turned out, it was kind of harder to give a gift to politicians, because there are lots of policies and procedures around that, and there was also the concern that it would disappear forever in the catacombs. So I kind of suggested that perhaps we could gift it to the Museum of Australian Democracy as a nice kind of alternate.
A safe holding place for it, yeah, and an opportunity for it to be seen and heard here. So we're very glad to receive it into our collection as an example of community activism and things that happen when people come together to have their voices heard. Tal, as you look over it, do you have a favourite time?
Yeah, there are a couple of favourites. I guess the first thing to point out about the messages was there were about 4 themes that kept coming up.
Yeah.
So the idea behind this project was very much like about democracy and about making sure that everybody had a say. So I didn't edit any, I didn't leave any out, and I didn't censor any of the messages. But I did ask for people to start with the words PM please, which is why they all start with the words PM please. So the 4 key themes were legalise same-sex marriage, improve the treatment of asylum seekers and refugees, address climate change, and address domestic violence. So there are lots of different kind of phrasings around those themes, but there are some kind of ones like when I performed the making of this quilt at the Hillscene Live Festival in Monbulk in Victoria, which is in the Dandenong Ranges. I kind of had like a stitch-in and invited people that were at the festival to come and sit down with
So
me.
it was a festival and it was a stitch-in and people came.
Yeah, so people who were at the festival were invited to come and sit down, and for those who didn't know, I kind of showed how to do some basic stitching so that they could stitch their own message.
Okay.
And 23 people sat down and did that with me, and this one here is one example of that. It says PM please tax Gina, which is Gina Reinhardt. And that was actually hand stitched by an older gentleman who hadn't really done any needlework before, and he laboured over this little message for about 45 minutes, but he was very, he was going to get it done, and so that was a really great example of one of my favourites.
Brilliant, brilliant. And tell what about yourself personally? When did you get started with quilting and craft?
Yeah, so funnily enough, I've only been quilting for about 4 years now. I've been an artist my kind of entire adult life, but I was always playing around with different mediums. And when I was about to start my PhD, I decided that I should probably just focus on one. And I knew that I wanted to combine my kind of work in community development and community engagement with my love for the arts, as well as my practice of activism, which is a kind of personal practice. And it just struck me that this medium, the medium of using applique and quilting techniques to create large-scale wall hangings, was a really beautiful kind of marriage of all those things. And as soon as I started, it hit me like a ton of bricks that this is the medium I was always supposed to work in, because of course my grandmother, Dawn Fitzpatrick, is an artist, and she worked in this very same medium. So yeah, it's just been kind of smooth sailing since then.
Well, it's one of the things about patchwork, isn't it, that it seems to be one of these traditions passed down from generations, and well, traditionally between women, of course it doesn't have to be, but so that you're continuing that tradition, but not in the traditional way.
So whereas many people get to sit down with their grandma, my grandma, who's 95 this year, wasn't quite able to teach me how to quilt, but I use her work as reference a lot. So she has a book that she published called Applique Quilting, and I use that a lot as a reference, and I use her actual works, which I kind of have all over my parents' house, and I have a couple of pieces myself. So I'm constantly going back and kind of having that intergenerational conversation.
And has she seen this quilt?
She has seen this quilt.
What did she say about it?
She's particularly proud of this project because it in part echoes one of her works that is actually in the collection of the Australian Museum of Democracy. It's a quilt called The Prime Ministers at the Marble Bar, and it's a really large portrait of all of Australia's Prime Ministers from 1901 to 2007. So John Howard's the most recent one, and Keating and John Howard she kind of added at a later date.
Right.
So if you look at the quilt, they're actually different colours to the rest of the Prime Ministers. But yeah, so this is almost a continuation of that with us doing the portraits of the Prime Minister, and I'm so excited that it's going to be in the same collection together.
Yeah. Tal, thanks so much for coming to talk to us today, and thank you for your kind donation. It's a wonderful contribution and to the collection.
It's really my pleasure. I'm happy it has a loving new home.